They say the universe is vast, cold, and indifferent. They're half right. It's vast, certainly, and it can be cold. But indifferent? Not to us. Not after what we did. We always thought the great struggle would be against some monolithic, destructive force, a conquering armada, a ravenous horde. We were wrong. The Xylos hegemony wasn't like that at all. Their ambition was far more insidious, far more complete. They sought harmony. Not just peace, mind you, but absolute, perfect, universal integration. Every species, every culture, every thought, meticulously folded into their grand, serene, unchanging order. They didn't conquer, they assimilated. They didn't destroy, they optimized. Worlds simply joined. Civilizations vanished into their seamless collective, like ripples fading on a still pond. We first encountered them on the fringes of the Cygnus Arm, a small exploratory probe, barely a speck, sent back a single garbled transmission before going silent. Then nothing. For weeks. Then a perfectly ordered fleet emerged from hyperspace. Not menacing, not aggressive, but impossibly clean. Their ships were biomechanical, organic structures of smooth, pearlescent material, moving with a silent, synchronized grace that chilled you to the bone. No weapons visible, no hostile intent, according to first analysis. Just profound, unsettling order. Their first communication wasn't a demand, but an invitation, a broadcast in perfect, synthesized galactic common, explaining their philosophy. "We bring the ultimate peace," it stated, the voice smooth and genderless. "The end of conflict, the cessation of discord. Join us, become part of the great harmony." We, being human, were immediately suspicious. Peace sounded great, but cessation of discord and great harmony from a race that just made entire civilizations disappear? No thanks. But they were persistent and utterly unyielding. They didn't engage in traditional warfare. When a human fleet fired warning shots, their ships simply absorbed the energy, converting it into a soft, glowing light before continuing their advance. Their strategy was insidious. They established integration zones, massive invisible fields that would slowly, meticulously, begin to reorder a system. Planets would realign themselves into perfect orbits. Atmospheres would standardize. Ecosystems would be optimized for peak efficiency. The other major galactic powers, the stoic Cathar and the mercantile Vorlag, had already dealt with the Xylos. The Cathar, a race of deeply spiritual, contemplative beings, had simply folded. Their ancient monasteries and complex philosophies were streamlined into Xylos order, their individuality subsumed. The Vorlag, adaptable traders and pragmatists, initially tried to negotiate, to find a niche within the hegemony. They were given roles, highly efficient ones, but their competitive spirit, their endless haggling, their very Vorlagness was smoothed away. They became utterly efficient, utterly uninspired, just cogs in the harmony. We watched, horrified, as entire swaths of the galaxy, once vibrant and diverse, became silent. Perfectly ordered voids of Xylos integration. There was no resistance, because resistance implied discord, and discord was incompatible with their very nature. They simply flowed over everything, like a tide. And we knew, with a cold dread, that our turn was next. Humanity, however, had a problem. Not a weakness, perhaps, but certainly an anomaly. The Xylos, in their endless pursuit of perfect order, had never encountered anything quite like us. We were a cacophony. A screaming, beautiful, illogical mess of contradictions. Our scientists and psychologists had been studying Xylos communiques for months. Dr. Alara Vance, head of the Xenopsychology Division, looked haggard, circles under her eyes. Their collective consciousness operates on principles of pure, streamlined logic, she explained to the High Council. They have no concept of individuality beyond its optimized contribution to the whole. No irrationality, no self-contradiction, no humor. A nervous titter went through the council chambers. Humor in the face of galactic annihilation. But Vance was deadly serious. They've attempted to analyze our art, our music, our literature. They find it chaotic, inefficient, often nonsensical. A painting that evokes sadness and joy simultaneously. A story where the hero sacrifices themselves for an illogical ideal. A melody that shifts from major to minor without resolution. Their internal processing, it stalls. The Xylos initiated their first integration zone around the Sol system. Not a direct assault, but a shimmering, barely visible energetic field that slowly expanded like an oil slick across the void. Sensors indicated it was subtly altering the atomic structure of interstellar dust, aligning cosmic rays, even nudging asteroids into more harmonious orbits. And the worst part, a low, resonant hum began to permeate everything. A mental presence. Kinetic rounds were subtly diverted, spinning off into new, perfectly calculated trajectories. Their ships, untouchable, continued their slow, relentless advance. That's when Dr. Vance, along with a team of brilliant, slightly unhinged artists, philosophers, and data scientists, proposed the Cacophony Protocol. It was a desperate Hail Mary pass, a weapon built not of metal and plasma, but of pure, unadulterated humanity. If they crave order, Vance stated, her voice trembling with conviction, we will give them chaos. If they seek harmony, we will give them dissonance. If they understand logic, we will give them us. It was a race against time. The integration zone was expanding. People on the outer colonies, despite warnings, began to report feelings of profound calm, followed by a terrifying loss of identity. Their personal memories blurring, their unique quirks fading, their thoughts harmonizing with the distant, encroaching Xylos hum. It was like watching a color photograph slowly fade to a monochrome gray. We converted every available long-range communication dish, every repurposed orbital refinery, every deep space telescope into a cacophony array. The process was chaotic, naturally. Engineers argued with artists about optimal signal modulation. Psychologists debated which emotional spectrum would be most disruptive. Comedians tried to explain the nuance of irony to data scientists. It was in itself a perfect microcosm of human chaos. The core of the Cacophony Protocol was the synaptic hub, housed deep beneath the Martian plains. It was a massive quantum neural network designed not to process data, but to amplify and randomize it. It pulled from every public and private database, every recorded conversation, every piece of media ever created by humanity. It absorbed a century of live, unedited global news feeds. It even tapped into anonymized, consenting human minds across the system, capturing fleeting, raw, emotional states. A moment of frustration in traffic, the joy of a child seeing snow for the first time, the quiet grief of loss, the simmering anger at injustice, the thrill of discovery, the absurdity of a cat video, all of it simultaneously. Dr. Vance rarely slept. She would walk through the synaptic hub, listening to the murmuring data streams, a faint, almost mad smile on her face. "They thrive on predictability," she'd whisper, "on statistical averages. We're about to show them the statistical outlier of all time, the infinite variable." The day of the activation was grim. Our military forces, battered but defiant, formed a desperate perimeter around Earth and Mars. They knew they couldn't win a direct fight. Their purpose was simply to hold the Xylus at bay, long enough for the cacophony arrays to fully charge. A few skirmishes broke out, our ships darting in, firing a few ineffective rounds, before retreating. The Xylus responded with silent, precise nullification. Then the command came down. Initiate protocol. The Xylus didn't scream. They didn't even flinch. But we saw the initial effects immediately. Their shimmering ships, which had been moving with such fluid grace, suddenly stuttered, a subtle hiccup in their perfect formation. Their pearlescent hulls, usually so smooth, seemed to ripple, as if something unseen was disturbing their internal structure. The initial broadcast was pure, undiluted human chaos. 1,000 distinct voices saying 1,000 contradictory things. A classical symphony blended with heavy metal. The complex mathematics of quantum physics intertwined with a kindergarten drawing of a dog, a passionate declaration of love, followed by a petty argument about laundry, the intricate rules of a sport next to a nonsensical nursery rhyme, all of it, overlapping, interwoven, impossible to categorize or reconcile. The Xylus Collective, which processed information with terrifying efficiency, was being force-fed a data stream that fundamentally defied their core programming. It was like trying to compress an infinite, ever-changing fractal into a single static pixel. Their psychic networks, designed for efficient, ordered communication, became congested. Their highly logical processing units began to overheat with logical paradoxes. On our monitors, the Xylus ships were now visibly distressed. Their energy fields flickered erratically. Some vessels began to drift, no longer maintaining their perfect formation. A few even began to emit strange high-pitched whines, the first actual sounds we'd ever heard from them. Sounds of pure, agonizing dissonance. "They're trying to integrate it," Dr. Vance yelled over the growing hum of the synaptic hub, a wild look in her eyes. "They have to. Their entire existence is built on absorbing and harmonizing everything." Their perfectly synchronized movements became ragged. One pilot reported seeing a Xylus ship suddenly veering off course, performing a series of erratic, almost playful maneuvers before crashing into another Xylus vessel. It was an absurdity that should have been impossible. The most profound effect was happening within the Xylus collective mind. Their psychic communication, normally a seamless flow, began to fragment. Individual Xylus minds, unaccustomed to independent thought, were suddenly overloaded with raw, unorganized human data. They experienced emotions. A Xylus drone witnessing the beauty of a human child's drawing being broadcast might feel a flicker of unbidden joy. A Xylus strategist processing a human political debate might experience frustration at the inherent illogic. These were alien concepts to them, like viruses corrupting their pure, ordered code. The Xylus response escalated, but not in a way we'd anticipated. Instead of a crushing counterattack, they began to project a countersignal, a vast, soothing, deeply harmonic frequency designed to override the cacophony. It was like a colossal psychic blanket, trying to smother our chaotic broadcast with their profound sense of order. But humanity, in its infinite unpredictability, simply adjusted. Dr. Vance's team, working in a frenzy, recalibrated the cacophony arrays. If the Xylus sent harmony, we'd send back the absence of harmony. Not just noise, but anti-harmony. We started broadcasting segments of modern art that defied traditional aesthetics, philosophical arguments that ended in paradox, experimental music designed to evoke discomfort, the visceral, illogical thrill of a horror film, the self-sacrificial love of a parent for a child, the bitter taste of betrayal, the sheer, exhilarating freedom of chaos. The Xylus collective's countersignal began to waver. It was like watching a perfectly straight line try to straighten a tangled ball of yarn. Their attempts to absorb and neutralize our data only brought them more into contact with its inherent contradictions. Individual Xylus units began to experience what our psychologists termed cognitive dissonance cascade. Their logical minds, unable to reconcile the conflicting human information, began to short-circuit. Xylus engineers suddenly obsessed over the illogical beauty of a perfectly placed imperfection. Xylos strategists became paralyzed by the concept of a choice that yielded no optimal outcome. Their soldiers, whose minds were linked into a precise tactical network, began to experience doubt. One Xylos scout ship, previously an extension of the collective will, broke formation. It didn't attack us. It simply spun on its axis, broadcasting a fragmented, distorted series of numbers and symbols. Dr. Vance's team analyzed it. It wasn't a threat. A Xylos asking why, a question that had no optimal, harmonious answer. The Xylos hegemony, an empire built on the seamless, interconnected flow of information, found its very foundation crumbling. Their vast, galaxy-spanning neural network was becoming a swamp of conflicting data, their perfect harmony dissolving into a roar of unresolvable paradoxes. They weren't being destroyed by physical force. They were being overwhelmed by meaninglessness, as they perceived it. Their response was unlike anything we'd ever seen. Not a full retreat, not a surrender, but a systematic, surgical severing. They began to disconnect vast portions of their own collective. Entire fleets, entire integrated worlds were cut off from the main hegemony network. They were isolating the infected areas, the zones where human influence had seeped too deeply into their consciousness. The Xylos' main fleet, which had pushed into the inner soul system, began to contract. Their ships no longer moved with their perfect, effortless grace. They shuddered, their pearlescent hulls now marred by faint, dark lines, stress fractures in their biomechanical forms. The low hum of their integration zone faltered, becoming ragged, then silent. They didn't initiate self-destruct sequences or launch a final desperate attack. They simply pulled back. A slow, methodical, agonizing retreat. leaving behind the fractured fragments of their own civilization. Those isolated Xylos fleets, cut off from the harmony, drifted silently. Some powered down completely, their purpose lost. Others began to move erratically, mimicking the illogical human behaviors they had been exposed to. We even observed one Xylos ship, seemingly drawing abstract patterns in space with its energy trails, a form of alien graffiti. The core Xylos hegemony, however, vanished. They retreated to the deepest, most shielded sectors of their space, creating a vast quarantine zone around our galaxy, a psychic wall of absolute silence, broken only by the faint residual echoes of human cacophony within their own fractured networks. They couldn't defeat us, couldn't integrate us, couldn't even comprehend us, so they did the only logical thing left. They classified us as an existential informational threat, an anomaly to be contained and, perhaps, endlessly analyzed from a safe distance. The silence that descended upon Sol was different from the pre-Xylos peace. It wasn't just the absence of war, it was the presence of a profound universal lesson. We had won, not by being stronger or smarter or faster, but by being irrevocably, magnificently human. Dr. Elara Vance, standing by the now silent synaptic hub, looked out at the stars. She had aged 10 years in a few months, but her eyes held a new, fierce light. "They couldn't process us," she murmured. "We were too contradictory, too illogical, too beautiful." The other galactic species, the Cathar and the Vorlog, slowly began to re-emerge from the Xylos integration. Their minds were scarred, their individuality diluted, but with our help they began the long, painful process of rediscovering themselves. They looked at humanity with a new mix of awe, respect, and profound caution. We were dangerous, not because of our weapons, but because of our very essence. And so, humanity continues its journey among the stars, not as conquerors, but as the galaxy's greatest mystery. We carry within us the capacity for unimaginable kindness and horrifying cruelty, for profound wisdom and utter foolishness, for logic and for pure, beautiful madness. And somewhere, beyond the great Xylos quarantine zone, perhaps a lone Xylos unit, irrevocably fractured from the harmony, is trying to understand a human joke, or weeping silently at a sunset it was never meant to perceive, or perhaps simply wondering why a creature would choose to be unhappy when it could be harmonious. And to that, humanity would simply reply, because that's just how we are. And sometimes that's enough.